James Carter, a powerful billionaire, always believed money could control everything until he spotted his ex-wife Samantha playing the violin on a crowded street, her pregnant belly haunting him. But this isn't the biggest secret threatening his empire. What is the billionaire's secret? Don't miss this gripping story. The glass skyscraper of Carter Enterprises soared above the Manhattan skyline, where power and ambition intertwined in every gleaming edge. On the top floor, James Carter's office stood as a masterpiece of modern architecture, its glass walls reflecting the brilliant lights of the city. At the center, an immaculate ebony desk, polished to a mirror-like sheen, commanded the room like an altar of authority, surrounded by plush leather chairs reserved for only the most significant of guests. James Carter stood tall behind the desk, his left hand gripping an expensive metal pen, his right resting lightly on the desk's edge. He had just concluded a meeting via the large screen with investors. His deep, steely voice had sealed the fate of millions of dollars in mere minutes. Every word he uttered was an absolute decree, unchallenged and final. His piercing gaze, sharp and unyielding, seemed to not only scrutinize those before him but penetrate their very thoughts. The room itself was a testament to precision and controlled documents neatly stacked into ordered piles, a vintage clock ticking with steady resolve, and a single abstract painting on the wall, a depiction of order within chaos. Yet amidst all this grandeur, there was a stark absence of warmth, as if the space existed solely to embody one singular will, the will of James Carter. He moved toward the massive glass window, where the sprawl of Manhattan unfolded below him. The neon lights of countless buildings formed a dazzling tapestry, yet James did not smile. He looked down at the endless stream of traffic, the ceaseless throng of people moving to and fro, his expression unmoved. In the dim glow of the evening, his face betrayed a fleeting emptiness. He let out a faint sigh, his shoulders sinking ever so slightly, as though the absolute control he wielded had begun to weigh upon him. Power had lifted him to unimaginable heights, but at the summit he stood alone, solitary in the silence of his own making. Beside it all, Manhattan at this hour resembled a ceaseless river of light and sound. Crowds hurried past street corners, high heels clicking sharply against stone pavements, car horns blaring amidst the crisp chill of an early evening. Amid the bustling rhythm, Samantha Williams stood quietly with a violin resting against her shoulder. Her worn gray coat did little to hide her frail frame. Thick black hair was tied neatly at the nape of her neck, though a few strands had come loose, catching the golden glow of the street lamp above. Her eyes were fixed on the deliberate movements of her bow hand, her lips pressed together as if holding back a universe of emotions. The violin, battered and scratched, its dark wood dulled with age, sang a melody soft yet profound, mingling with the cold wind that brushed past. The tune wasn't overly mournful, yet it carried an ineffable sorrow, a whisper of a heart weathered by pain. It weaved through the rushing crowd, but few paused to listen. Designer coats, rolling suitcases gliding across the cobblestone, and the glare of smartphone screens, everything passed her by without a glance. And yet Samantha remained rooted there, her slender figure like a reed swaying but unbroken in the storm. Her eyes shone with quiet determination, untouched by shame or doubt. Though the world moved past her, leaving her behind, she refused to surrender to it. A middle-aged man in a sharp suit stopped for a moment. Without a word, he dropped a coin into her open violin case, the metallic clink echoing faintly, like the distant sound of hope. Samantha nodded in gratitude, her lips curving ever so slightly, though her gaze stayed steadfast. The few scattered coins in her violin case could never buy her a warm meal or a life of comfort. But Samantha played not just for survival, she played to hold on to her soul. Music was all she had left, and with every note, she sent a message to the unfeeling world rushing past. She would endure. Against the tide of indifference, she would persevere. Samantha closed her eyes as the bow touched the violin strings, its poignant notes cascading through the bustling street corner. Yet no melody, no matter how tender, could drown out the memory that had haunted her for years, the memory of a gala night that fractured her heart and her marriage to James. Flashback: the grand ballroom of the Winthrop mansion glittered under the opulent glow of crystal chandeliers, their light refracting through fine wine glasses held by elegant hands. Sparkling gowns intertwined with tailored tuxedos, blending seamlessly with the gentle strains of a live orchestra playing in the corner. Laughter rippled through the room, refined, yet brimming with unspoken judgment. Samantha stood beside James, feeling as though the chandelier's light bore down on her, exposing every flaw for the crowd's scrutiny. She wore a custom-made crimson silk gown that complemented her smooth, deep brown skin, once a source of pride. But tonight, both the dress and she herself felt out of place amidst this world. She forced a natural smile as James introduced her to his colleagues and associates.
"My wife, Samantha, a talented violinist." "Oh, really?"
A silver-haired man offered a wry smile, his eyes sweeping over Samantha as if appraising a curiosity.
"James, you never fail to surprise me. Your taste is unique. Sometimes I wonder where you find inspiration for such unconventional choices."
Light chuckles rippled from nearby guests, but Samantha felt a chill race down her spine. She glanced at James, hoping he would refute the veiled insult. Instead, he merely offered a faint smile, raised his glass, and took a sip of wine, leaving her to fend for herself.
"You're a violinist, aren't you?"
A blonde woman in a glittering gold gown stepped closer, her voice smooth but laden with barely concealed derision.
"I've always thought music is such a lovely escape, especially for those from challenging backgrounds."
Samantha's blood simmered, but she held her composure.
"I believe art isn't just an escape,"
she replied, her voice steady but resolute.
"It's the soul's voice, a way to connect with something beyond circumstance."
The woman raised an eyebrow, smirking.
"Oh, of course. I only meant it's admirable how you've overcome your obstacles."
Samantha opened her mouth to respond, but James's hand gently rested on her back.
"Samantha, don't let small jokes bother you,"
he murmured, guiding her away before she could say more.
"Jokes?"
Samantha turned to him, her voice low but brimming with restrained anger.
"James, they weren't joking. Couldn't you see that? There's no need to make a scene,"
he replied, taking another sip of wine, his tone subdued, as if unwilling to attract attention.
"These people are important. I can't risk alienating them over a few careless remarks." "Careless?"
Samantha could hardly believe her ears.
"They don't see me as a person, James, and you just stood there as if you agreed with them."
James sighed, a hint of irritation flashing in his eyes.
"Samantha, you're reading too much into this. You know my work depends on these connections. They didn't mean to offend you. Just let it go, let it go."
Her voice trembled with disbelief.
"You want me to ignore it every time they demean me, just so you can maintain your business ties? Do you even know what that does to me?"
James raised a hand to his temple, massaging it as though trying to stave off a headache.
"I don't want to argue about this here, Samantha. Say whatever you want when we're home, but tonight, just keep the peace."
Samantha froze, staring at James as if she no longer recognized the man she once loved so deeply. His eyes were cold, detached, indifferent to her pain. In that moment, she realized he would never stand by her side. Without another word, Samantha turned and walked away, leaving James behind. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, a sound swallowed by the room's laughter, clinking glasses, and ongoing music. No one noticed her departure. The night carried on as though her absence meant nothing. She did not cry, but each step felt heavier than the last, laden with the weight of disappointment and loneliness. Samantha didn't just leave the party that night, she left James as well, the man who lacked the courage to protect her from cruelty in favor of preserving his own world. Another reason was James's demand that Samantha abandon her music career to accompany him on an extended business trip. That day, their luxurious apartment's living room, encased in floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the Manhattan skyline, was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Samantha sat on the sofa, her violin resting across her lap. She had just returned from a major performance, still basking in the euphoria of its warm reception. James entered, his crisp white shirt immaculate, but his face devoid of a smile. He held a glass of wine in his hand, the sound of his footsteps sharp against the polished wooden floor. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking, his voice cold and deliberate.
"We need to talk, Samantha."
She looked up, her eyes still sparkling with joy.
"James, did you watch the video of my performance yet? They loved my new piece.
He cut her off without hesitation.
Samantha, I need you to come with me to Europe for 6 months. This trip is critical, and I can't do it alone."
The smile vanished from Samantha's face. She set the violin aside, her gaze filled with disbelief.
6 months? James, I have a packed performance schedule. I can't just drop everything to go with you.
James placed his glass on the table and sat across from her, his voice steady, his tone nearly devoid of emotion.
Samantha, don't you see? This job isn't just for me. It's for us. I'm building a future for both of us. Your music, you can put it on hold. It's only 6 months.
A sharp pain pierced Samantha's chest.
Put it on hold? James, music isn't a job I can simply put aside. It's my life. It's how I define myself. Don't you understand that?
He frowned, as though frustrated by the need to explain something he considered obvious.
You're acting like I'm asking you to give up everything. It's only 6 months. Don't you think that's worth it? I need you there. The people I'll be meeting are some of the most powerful in the world, and your presence will help us. Help us.
Samantha stood, her voice rising, the hurt she had tried to suppress now unmistakable.
You don't need me there because I'm Samantha, the woman you love. You need me because I'm Samantha, the wife who makes you look perfect in front of those people.
James was silent for a moment, his eyes narrowing, his expression turning cold as ice.
You're blowing this out of proportion. This isn't about love or appearances. This is reality. We need to think beyond our personal feelings.
She stared at him, her eyes brimming with tears that refused to fall.
James, I chose to love you. I've sacrificed so much to be your wife. But my music is the one thing I've never given up. And now you want me to let go of even that. I'm not asking you to give it up forever.
James said, his voice lowering as though trying to rein in his frustration.
I'm asking you to prioritize just this once. Don't be selfish, Samantha.
His words cut through her like a blade. Samantha drew in a deep breath, her hands trembling as she picked up her violin from the sofa. She gazed at it, her fingers brushing lightly over its glossy surface.
This isn't selfishness, James. This is me protecting the one part of myself you haven't destroyed.
She turned and walked toward the bedroom, carrying the violin as though it were her only anchor.
If you can't understand that, then I don't think we have anything left to say.
From James's perspective, James sat alone on the sofa after Samantha left, the city light streaming through the glass walls of their apartment. He stared at the unfinished glass of wine on the table, a hollow emptiness creeping through him. In his mind, he replayed the moment Samantha had defended her violin as though it were an extension of her very soul. He couldn't understand why she couldn't set her passion aside, just once, to stand by him in this critical battle. To James, everything was negotiable. Everything could be rearranged if it served a greater purpose. But the look of disappointment and resolve in Samantha's eyes as she walked away made him confront an unsettling truth. He had never truly understood her, and perhaps he had never really tried to. From Samantha's perspective in her modest new apartment, Samantha sat with her violin in hand. She drew the bow across the strings, a single note ringing out fragile, yet brimming with life. It was all she had left her music and herself. Meanwhile, James stared out of the glass walls of his high-rise apartment. Manhattan glittered below, but the emptiness inside him swallowed the brilliance whole. Back to the present, Samantha drew the bow sharply across the violin, the music suddenly splintering like the pain still etched into her heart. The scars within her remained, but now she understood she didn't need someone who stood idly behind her when she needed protection. Samantha had learned to stand on her own, even when the world turned its back on her. The sleek black limousine glided through Manhattan's crowded streets, a gleaming emblem of power and ambition. Inside, James Carter leaned back against the luxurious leather seat, one hand scrolling through a tablet displaying financial reports, the other holding a glass of sparkling water. His impeccably tailored suit and polished watch only enhanced the image of a man with an unerring grip on every aspect of his life. Everything in James's world, numbers, deals, relationships, was under his control. He was on his way to a critical meeting with investors, another opportunity to solidify his position at the top. The car slowed as it approached a congested intersection, stopping at a red light. James glanced up absent-mindedly, his gaze drifting past the tinted window. That's when he saw her. Samantha stood on the sidewalk, her fragile frame nearly swallowed by the bustling crowd. She clutched a worn violin, the old instrument cradled against her shoulder. A light gray coat hung loosely on her slim figure, her dark hair tied neatly back, save for a few strands that framed her face. But it was her eyes, bright, resolute, and unyielding, that caught his attention amidst the chaos. The sound of her violin reached him even through the city's cacophony. The melody was delicate yet brimming with raw emotion, an island of vulnerability adrift in the sea of blaring car horns and hurried footsteps. She didn't look around, didn't seek anyone's approval. Her focus was wholly on the music. James froze. The scene before him hit him like a thunderclap. This was Samantha, the woman who once stood by his side at glittering galas, who spoke of music and art with a fiery passion in her voice. Now, here she was, playing her violin on a street corner like any other anonymous performer. The crowd swept past her in an unbroken stream. A few cast fleeting glances her way, but no one lingered. A man tossed a coin into the open violin case without breaking stride, disappearing into the flow of bodies almost instantly. Inside the limo, James couldn't tear his eyes away. A tangle of emotions churned within him: shock, wounded pride, and an unfamiliar pang of guilt. Did she know he frequently passed through this area? Was her presence here, with her violin, a silent rebuke? Or was this truly the life she'd embraced after walking away from him? His grip on the tablet tightened as he tried to force his attention back to the numbers on the screen. But the music drifted through the glass, threading its way into his mind like a haunting refrain. James glanced at his watch. He was already running late. Investors didn't appreciate tardiness, and James Carter was not the kind of man who left a bad impression. Yet Samantha's eyes, resolute but shadowed with weariness, rooted him in place. He reached for the button and lowered the window, his gaze fixed on her. Taking a deep breath, his lips pressed into a hard line.
"Driver, pull over,"
he said.
"Sir."
The driver turned slightly, confusion flickering across his face.
"Pull over."
James repeated, his voice calm but laced with an edge of restrained urgency. The limousine eased toward the curb. James didn't fully understand what he was doing. He only knew he couldn't let this moment pass like an ordinary scene in the city. In one fluid motion, he stepped out of the car, his polished leather shoes landing on the cold pavement as he turned to face Samantha. The violin's notes continued, weaving their fragile melody into the din of the city. Samantha didn't look up, seemingly unaware of his presence. But James stood there, feeling something unfamiliar settle over him. For the first time in his life, the power and control he had built his identity upon felt utterly meaningless. The limousine door swung open, and James Carter stepped out, his polished leather shoes making a soft click against the stone pavement. A cold, early winter wind swept through the street, carrying the cacophony of the bustling crowd. But James paid no attention to any of it, his gaze fixed solely on Samantha, just a few steps away. He moved through the throng with purpose, his strides brisk and deliberate, as if this were an urgent meeting demanding absolute resolve. Yet with each step, his emotions churned in a chaotic storm. Curiosity pulled him forward. What was she doing here? How had she fallen from the proud artist he once knew to a street performer? Pride stung him like a sharp rebuke. Why would she allow herself to be in such a position, in plain view, in his city, and buried deep within it all? An unfamiliar sensation gnawed at him, guilt. With every step, the weight in the air grew heavier. The passers-by didn't spare him a glance, just another man in a suit amid the city's endless rush. But for James, the closer he got to Samantha, the more his inner turmoil swelled. Samantha continued to play, oblivious to James's presence. Her violin sang its melancholy tale, the old instrument gleaming faintly under the streetlights as her fingers danced deftly across the strings. The melody was both tender and aching, as though she were pouring her very soul into each note. James stopped in front of her. He stood there, tall and imposing, a stark contrast to her slight figure wrapped in an old coat, her worn shoes scuffed from years of use. The crowd flowed around them, indifferent, as if they were two solitary figures in a world that refused to pause. Samantha glanced up, sensing someone blocking her path. Her eyes met James's, a flicker of surprise flashing across her face before she masked it with a calm indifference. Her hands remained poised on the bow, ready to draw another note. James said nothing at first. He simply looked at her, his piercing gaze softened by a confusion he couldn't suppress. Inside him, emotions twisted and collided, a vague anger he couldn't name, a disorientation at seeing her here, and a subtle ache that defied explanation.
"Samantha,"
he finally said, his voice rough, as though her name had been buried too deep in him to speak for years. She didn't respond. Her eyes didn't waver, but they held no warmth, no invitation. The violin in her hands seemed almost like armor, a barrier between her and the man she had once loved. The air between them grew taut, thick with unspoken words. The din of the city faded into the background as if the world had momentarily stopped. James stood frozen, his eyes searching hers, silently pleading for answers he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. James staring directly into Samantha's eyes, his voice taut, fists clenched at his sides.
"What is this, Samantha? What are you trying to do here, standing on this sidewalk, playing your violin for a crowd too busy to notice, as if you're playing the victim for attention? Do you think this helps anything?"
Samantha pausing mid-bow, her gaze icy, but her voice steady and deliberate.
"Playing the victim? How absurd! Do you think everything is a performance, James? Do you really believe I'm standing here to beg for pity or to impress you?"
James taking a step closer, his eyes a mix of anger and confusion.
"What am I supposed to think? We were in a different world once, Samantha. You were an admired artist, someone who lit up a stage under the brightest lights. You don't belong on these streets, playing for strangers who don't."
Samantha smirking faintly, her expression touched by a flicker of pain.
"And where do you think I belong, James? Beside you in gilded ballrooms where your wealthy friends see me as some exotic accessory, or waiting at home for you to return from another business trip while you never once ask me if I'm okay."
James struggling to rein in his frustration, his voice lowering but remaining rigid.
"That's not what I meant. But seeing you here in this place, Samantha, it makes me feel."
Samantha cutting him off, her tone sharp and unwavering.
"Feel what, James? Ashamed or maybe guilty? You don't need to feel anything. I'm not here waiting for you to swoop in and save me. I'm here because I want to be, because I need to do this for myself."
James's face tight with discomfort, his voice growing more urgent.
"For yourself, Samantha, you're diminishing yourself, don't you see? Playing on the street like this, What are you trying to prove? That you don't need me? That I was wrong?
Samantha fixing her gaze on him, her eyes deep and unyielding, her voice calm but razor sharp.
Wrong? James, you always think you're right. You think the world revolves around your decisions, your plans. But you've never understood that I don't have to prove anything to you. You're not the center of my life, James. Not anymore.
James opened his mouth to respond, but Samantha spoke again before he could find the words. Samantha, her voice lowering, almost a whisper, but each word weighted with emotion.
You know something, James? There was a time when I loved you so much. I thought I could give up everything to be with you, but you never truly saw me. I wasn't the woman in your dreams. I was just someone who made you look better to the world.
James, unable to hold back, his voice rising slightly.
That's not true. I tried, Samantha. I did everything I could to give us a better life.
Samantha letting out a bitter laugh, her eyes shimmering with quiet sadness.
Everything. What you did wasn't for me, James. It was for you. Your better life never had space for me.
James clenched his fists tighter, his gaze caught somewhere between anger and helplessness. Samantha didn't look away, as if daring him to say something more. Samantha taking a deep breath, her voice soft but edged with steel.
James, you should go back to your car. I wouldn't want to make you late for your important meeting. I won't stand in your way anymore.
She turned away, her focus returning to her violin. Her hands lifted the bow with a quiet grace, and the first notes of her music filled the air. They were gentle but resolute, a declaration that she had chosen her own path. James stood frozen. He wanted to say something, to wrest control of the moment as he always had, but this time, every word died in his throat. Samantha's violin cut through the noise of the city, lingering in his mind like a question with no answer. The limousine waited by the curb, but James didn't move. He simply stood there, watching Samantha's slender figure, feeling for the first time in his life that everything he had believed in was slipping irrevocably out of his grasp. The limousine sped through the crowded streets, leaving behind the glittering glow of city lights. But in James's mind, the image of Samantha standing on the sidewalk clung to him, etched into his thoughts as if it had been burned there. He closed his eyes, yet the memory remained vivid, her frail figure wrapped in a faded coat, the worn violin in her hands, and the unwavering determination in her eyes. It unsettled him. That strength, once the very quality he had loved about her, now felt like a mirror reflecting his own weaknesses. And then there was the other thing. He couldn't ignore the sight of the rounded curve of her stomach. James's eyes snapped open, his brows furrowing. The pregnancy. The word echoed in his mind, repeating like a painful refrain. Whose child was it? Could it be his? The thought gnawed at him, an unwelcome specter that refused to let him rest. When he returned to his opulent apartment, the city's lights streamed through the massive glass windows, illuminating the room in a cold, sterile glow. James sank onto the leather sofa, yanked off his tie, and tossed it aside. The tablet on the coffee table still displayed unfinished financial reports, but he couldn't focus on the numbers. Samantha's face flashed in his mind again. The melody from her violin, faint and nearly drowned out by the noise of the city, lingered in his head like a haunting echo. It wasn't just music, it was a silent reproach, a reminder of the mistakes he had buried and the choices he had tried to justify. James shot to his feet, pacing toward the window. His eyes stared out at the endless sprawl of Manhattan, his fists clenched tightly at his sides, his breathing uneven. For the first time in years, he felt utterly out of control, not of his finances, not of his company, but of his own emotions.
What is she doing?
He murmured, his voice barely audible even to himself.
Why would she choose this life? What does she want?
The lack of answers gnawed at him. He couldn't stand it, couldn't stand the way the image of her had burrowed into his mind like a phantom from the past he'd worked so hard to bury. James grabbed his phone, his fingers moving decisively over the screen. After a few rings, A deep voice answered on the other end.
"I need you to look into someone,"
James said, his tone sharp, carrying the same conviction he reserved for critical deals.
"Find everything. I want to know how she's living, what she's doing, and why she's there."
He paused, his gaze drifting to the shimmering city lights beyond the glass.
"Her name is Samantha Williams."
Ending the call, James set the phone down on the table. He leaned back into the chair, but the relief he sought didn't come. Instead, an uneasy restlessness simmered inside him, not just because of the unanswered questions, but because he already knew that whatever answers he uncovered, they would not be easy to face. In the penthouse office atop Carter Enterprises, James sat behind his ebony desk, the glow of his laptop screen casting sharp shadows across his face. The room was eerily quiet, the only sound the slow, deliberate ticking of the wall clock. Before him lay a large envelope, sent by the private investigator. Inside was a detailed report on Samantha's current life. James drew a deep breath, his fingers methodically tearing open the envelope and pulling out the neatly arranged pages. The bold headline on the first page immediately caught his eye: Nathan Alexander Contract Exploitation and Music Ownership Fraud. James's brows furrowed, his cold, sharp gaze scanning the report. It outlined how Samantha had once composed a brilliant violin piece, a deeply personal work hailed as one of her greatest creations. Nathan, a man who had once been a business associate of James, had approached Samantha during a vulnerable time. Exploiting his connection to James, Nathan convinced her that signing over the rights to the piece was the right move. Nathan had promised to promote the music, to use it as a stepping stone for Samantha's career. Instead, he sold the composition for an exorbitant price and pocketed the profits, leaving Samantha with nothing but bitterness and betrayal. James's grip on the report tightened, his knuckles turning white. A fire of rage flared within him, fierce and uncontrollable. Nathan had not only exploited Samantha, he had weaponized James's name and influence to destroy her.
"Damn it!"
James muttered, his voice low but cutting. He slammed the report onto the desk, his eyes burning with fury. But beneath the anger, another emotion crept in: guilt. Nathan had been a trusted ally, someone James had once relied on. And in that relationship, James had unwittingly become a tool in Nathan's deceit, a cog in the machinery that had crushed Samantha's aspirations. The image of Samantha standing on the sidewalk resurfaced in his mind, her resolute eyes, her unyielding posture despite the pain she bore. James couldn't stop the thought from surfacing: if he hadn't ever worked with Nathan, would Samantha have been spared this suffering? He rose abruptly, striding toward the massive window that framed the city's glittering skyline. Crossing his arms over his chest, he stared out into the vast expanse of night, his expression unreadable. The emptiness that had been gnawing at him was slowly replaced by something stronger, a fierce determination. Turning back to his desk, James sat down, picked up a pen, and stared at the blank sheet of paper before him. It wasn't a financial report or an investment plan. It was a clean slate for ideas, a roadmap for how he might begin to right this wrong. James didn't know if Samantha would ever accept his help. But this time, he wasn't doing it solely for her. He was doing it to reclaim some part of himself from the guilt that had been haunting him. And he was resolute: whether it meant facing Nathan or anyone else, he would do whatever it took to restore justice for Samantha. His eyes were heavy with thought but unwavering. The pen in his hand paused over the paper, marking the beginning of a plan. A sense of purpose began to take shape, though he knew the road ahead would not be easy. The shrill ring of his phone broke the silence, a reminder of the investors waiting for him in the conference room. James took a deep breath, set the pen down, and rose with renewed determination. The main conference room of Carter Enterprises sat at the pinnacle of the skyscraper, offering a sweeping view of Manhattan through its floor-to-ceiling glass windows. Daylight poured in, illuminating the somber faces gathered around the sleek walnut conference table. A space where billion-dollar decisions were routinely made now thrummed with tension. James Carter sat at the head of the table, his hand resting lightly on a gold fountain pen, his piercing gaze sweeping across the room. But today, the atmosphere lacked its usual composed efficiency. Faces were tight with unease, eyes filled with doubt, and voices pressed him with growing intensity. Richard Wallace, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, his tone sharp.
James, we've been hearing rumors. Are you using company resources to assist Samantha Williams? Do you realize how dangerous that is for the company's image?
Margaret Fields, a woman in her 50s, dressed in a dark tailored suit, her eyes icy.
Samantha Williams isn't just your ex-wife anymore. She's a name associated with failure, a street performer. Isn't that right? And you want this company tied to someone like her. Our partners will question your judgment, and I'm certain you know what that will lead.
James tightened his grip on the pen in his hand, his frustration barely masked. He had anticipated this storm, but hearing their accusations directly from the people who once trusted him still cut deep. Henry Collins, an older investor with a stern demeanor and dry tone.
James Carter Enterprises cannot afford personal entanglements to interfere with its collective interests. Samantha Williams made her choices, didn't she? She's not your responsibility anymore, and she's certainly not ours. Don't let personal feelings cloud your judgment.
Richard Wallace, leaning forward, his tone laced with sarcasm.
Exactly, James. This company isn't your playground for atoning personal mistakes. We're here to protect shareholder value, not to fix your past regrets.
James remained silent for a long moment, his gaze icy and unyielding. Inside, a storm brewed, frustration at their words, anger at their short-sightedness. What they said wasn't entirely wrong. Samantha wasn't tied to the company, and his actions could raise questions from stakeholders. Yet the thought of abandoning Samantha now felt like a betrayal of his own integrity. James's voice low but weighted.
She's no longer my wife, that's true. But that doesn't mean we or I have the right to turn away when she's been exploited, especially by someone who once worked with us.
Margaret Fields, her composure unshaken, her tone cutting.
You're talking about Nathan, aren't you, James? Nathan hasn't been connected to us for years. We severed all ties with him long ago. Whatever happened between Samantha and Nathan isn't Carter Enterprises' problem.
Henry Collins nodding in agreement, his voice heavy.
We all know Nathan created his own messes. If Samantha agreed to sign a deal with him, that was her choice. You don't need to drag this company into her troubles.
James locked eyes with Richard, a spark of restrained fury flickering in his gaze. James's voice sharpening.
Nathan used his association with me to coerce Samantha into signing an unfair contract. This isn't just her issue. It's my responsibility to make it right. Don't you see that if I do nothing, I and this company risk losing the very
The room fell silent. Unease and dissatisfaction radiated from the gathered executives, their expressions tight with skepticism. Margaret Fields, her tone dripping with challenge, almost mocking.
So, what's your plan, James? Sacrifice the company's reputation, sacrifice your position, all for one personal mistake.
James sitting straighter, his hands clasped together, his voice firm and resolute.
Carter Enterprises will not suffer from my decision, but if I fail to do the right thing, both I and this company will lose something far more important, our credibility, our integrity, and that will do more damage than anyone in this room can imagine.
The skeptical stares persisted, but James no longer cared. He didn't need their approval to take the path he knew was right. The meeting concluded, the investors filing out one by one, leaving James alone in the expansive conference room. He rose and walked to the large glass window, gazing down at the bustling streets below. Samantha's image surfaced in his mind again, but this time it didn't fill him with helplessness. James clenched his fists, his eyes glinting with determination. He knew the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles, but this time he wouldn't back down. He stepped out of the conference room, his shoulders heavy, but his resolve unshaken. The echoes of the investors' protests lingered in his mind, but they no longer mattered. Samantha had endured too much, and James knew that if he didn't act, he would forever see himself as a coward. Pausing before a large glass pane in the hallway, James took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the chaotic traffic below. Nathan. That man had used his name to destroy Samantha, something James would never forgive.
"Get me Nathan's office,"
James said into his phone, his voice low and commanding. Without allowing himself another moment of hesitation, he turned and strode toward the elevator. The real battle was just beginning. Nathan Alexander's office exuded opulence and excess, its walnut-paneled walls framing a massive abstract painting that loomed behind an oversized desk. Light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the pristine marble floors. Nathan leaned back in his chair, a smug and relaxed posture. As if awaiting a performance he was confident he would dominate. The door swung open, and James stepped inside with deliberate, commanding strides. His gaze, cold and unyielding, cut past the ostentatious decor, focusing solely on Nathan, the man who had inflicted so much damage on Samantha. Nathan looking up, smirking.
"James Carter, I was wondering when you'd show up. Take a seat, but I'm guessing you're not here to talk business, are you?"
James ignored the invitation, stopping directly in front of the desk, his eyes sharp as steel. James's voice low, laced with gravity.
"I'm not here to waste time, Nathan. We need to talk about Samantha's music."
Nathan raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise, though the sarcasm in his tone was impossible to miss. Nathan with a casual shrug.
That music. A remarkable piece, wasn't it? But I don't see why you're so concerned about it. It's no longer her problem or yours. The contract's been signed. It's done."
James's fists tightened, but he maintained his composure, James enunciating each word with precision.
"You used your connection to me to coerce her into signing an unfair deal. Samantha hasn't seen a single cent from the work she poured her soul into. That's unacceptable."
Nathan let out a short, dismissive laugh, his shoulders rising in a mockery of indifference. Nathan smirking.
"She's an artist, James. Artists are rarely practical. She signed the contract, and that makes it legal. The deal was good, for me. If she didn't bother to read the fine print, that's hardly my fault."
James stepped closer to the desk, his glare like fire boring into Nathan. James, his tone sharp, cutting.
"Return the rights to her music. If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows you exploited my name to pull off this scam. I won't let you walk away unscathed."
Nathan straightened in his chair, his smirk fading. But instead of fear, his narrowed eyes conveyed defiance. Nathan, his voice slow, each word calculated.
"James, do you think you can destroy me without dragging yourself down too? We both know how this world works. You wouldn't dare. Your reputation, your position, everything you've built would crumble, all for a woman who isn't even part of your life anymore."
The room plunged into silence. The two men stared at each other, their gazes locked in a battle of wills. James's voice steady, resolute.
"You're wrong, Nathan. I'm not the man you can manipulate anymore. I'll do what's right, no matter the cost."
Nathan smirked again, but the confidence behind it wavered ever so slightly. James turned and walked out without another word, but as he exited the room he felt no relief. Determination burned within him, but he knew this battle would not be won with one confrontation. To truly bring justice to Samantha, he would have to face challenges far greater than Nathan's defiance. Standing before the dazzling Manhattan skyline, James felt a storm of emotions churn within him: anger, frustration, and an unshakable resolve. The encounter with Nathan left him rattled but more focused than ever. This was only the beginning. Samantha. Her name echoed in his mind, carrying with it memories and pain. He had hurt her before, and now, even though she might never trust him again, he knew he had to make it clear this time. He would not back down. James turned abruptly, striding through the long hallway with renewed purpose. His eyes gleamed with determination as he made a silent vow. This time, he needed to face Samantha not just to apologize, but to prove that he was ready to right the wrongs he had done. The late afternoon sunlight bathed the quiet street in a gentle golden hue. A small cafe, tucked into a serene corner, exuded a cozy but somber atmosphere. Light filtered through the glass windows, reflecting softly on the dark wooden table where Samantha sat. Before her was a cup of tea, long gone cold, and in her hands, a music magazine. Yet her eyes were unfocused, lost in a sea of restless thoughts. She sighed, closing the magazine as her mind churned with tangled emotions. The sound of the door chime broke her reverie, pulling her back to the present. Samantha didn't look up immediately, but the footsteps, strong, deliberate, and unmistakably familiar, told her all she needed to know. James Carter stopped in front of her table, his gaze unwavering, as though trying to pierce through every wall she had built around herself. James's voice calm but resolute.
Samantha.
She lifted her head, her deep, dark eyes meeting his. There was no shock, no surprise, only a cold, measured look, as if she had long prepared for this moment. Samantha, her voice cool but cutting.
What do you want, James? I didn't think there was anything left for us to discuss.
James pulled out a chair and sat down, undeterred by her frosty demeanor. His eyes shone with determination, but his tone carried a quiet sincerity. James.
I spoke with Nathan. I know what he did with your music. Samantha, I'm going to get it back for you. You deserve to have what's rightfully yours.
Samantha narrowed her eyes, leaning back in her chair. A tense silence lingered as her gaze searched his, probing for the truth behind his words. Samantha, her voice icy, her eyes betraying a flicker of hurt.
Get it back? For me? Or for yourself, James? Do you want to atone for your mistakes, or do you just want to feel better about yourself?
James hesitated, the question striking deeper than he expected, but he didn't look away. His voice softened, heavy with regret but unwavering. James.
I know I was wrong. I stayed silent when you needed me most, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I can't change the past. All I can do now is fix what's still within my power. I don't expect your forgiveness, Samantha, but please, let me do what's right.
Samantha laughed, but the sound was hollow, bitter, almost painful. Samantha.
Wrong? James, do you think just admitting you were wrong is enough? You stood there at those glittering parties while your wealthy friends tore apart my dignity. You chose silence, chose to turn your back because your reputation mattered more than I did. When Nathan came along, where were you? Did you ever once ask me what I needed, what I wanted?
James held her gaze, his eyes brimming with unspoken remorse, yet his composure remained intact. James's voice tight, almost breaking.
I can't undo what's already happened, Samantha, but I can change what happens now. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing it for you.
Samantha studying him intently, her voice sharp.
For me, James, you've never done anything for me. Every choice you've made was to protect yourself, your reputation, your status. I've learned that when it comes to facing hardship, I can only rely on myself.
James opened his mouth to respond but stopped, knowing no words could penetrate the fortress she had built. Samantha stood, grabbing her bag, her gaze steady and unforgiving. Samantha, her voice soft but laced with pain.
If you want to help, do it for yourself, James. I don't need your pity, and I don't believe you'll do the right.
She walked out of the cafe, her heels clicking rhythmically against the wooden floor. James remained seated, his hands clasped tightly, his eyes fixed on her figure disappearing beyond the window. A wave of helplessness crashed over him, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of fierce determination. Samantha was right, he couldn't undo the past. But this time nothing would stop him from seeking justice for her, even if it meant confronting his own failures head-on. James stood, leaving behind the warm yet stifling space of their conversation. As dusk settled over the city and the streetlights began to glow, His mind churned with a tumult of emotions. Samantha's cold, unyielding gaze was a painful reminder that words alone would never be enough to regain her trust. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the towering skyline glittering in the distance. Nathan loomed as the immediate obstacle, a cunning and ruthless opponent. But James knew that to rectify his mistakes, retreat was not an option.
"This ends now,"
he muttered, his fists tightening. Without a moment's hesitation, he pulled out his phone and dialed Nathan's assistant. James's voice sharp, commanding.
"Tell him I need to see him immediately. There's no room for negotiation."
His words cut through the air like an unyielding decree. James strode toward his waiting car, his resolve unwavering. This time, Nathan would not escape unscathed. The office door swung open after a curt knock, and James stepped inside, his presence commanding yet tinged with a tension only an astute observer might detect. He strode across the thick charcoal gray carpet, each step an unspoken declaration he was here to stand firm, not to retreat. This meeting was no ordinary negotiation, it was a decisive move in his plan. Nathan Alexander sat behind an oversized desk, casually flipping through documents with one hand while the other lazily cradled a glass of red wine. The light streaming through the massive windows behind him cast a glow that only heightened his aura of smug self-assurance. Nathan glancing up, a smirk curling his lips.
"James Carter, back again, I see. You seem awfully busy with things outside your actual work. Tell me, what intriguing surprise have you brought me this time?"
James didn't respond immediately. He stopped in front of the desk, his gaze sharp, charged with both resolve and simmering anger. James's voice low, firm.
"I'm not here to argue or play games, Nathan. I'm here for Samantha's music. Return the rights to her composition. You and I both know it doesn't belong to you."
Nathan let out a sharp, mocking laugh, the sound echoing off the room's polished surfaces, grating like nails on glass. Nathan leaning forward, his eyes cold and calculating.
"You really think you can force my hand, James? Don't be naive. That composition is legally mine. Samantha signed the contract and that's that. Black and white agreements don't bend to sentimentality."
James's voice rising, tinged with anger.
"Signed willingly? You call exploiting my name to coerce her into an unfair deal willingly? Don't play dumb, Nathan. You didn't just ruin her. You tarnished your own reputation in the process. Did you really think I wouldn't figure this out?"
Nathan stood, placing his glass on the desk with deliberate force, the sharp clink of glass on wood punctuating the tension in the air. His gaze turned predatory as he leaned forward, hands braced against the desk. Nathan, each word measured, dripping with menace.
"James, I warned you before. Don't push me. If you insist on pursuing this, I won't hesitate to reveal some rather interesting details about Carter Enterprises' past dealings. Let's not pretend you've always taken the moral high ground to reach where you are today."
James froze, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. The threat wasn't baseless. There were decisions in the company's history choices he had reluctantly agreed to that weren't always pristine, but were necessary to weather difficult times. James's voice cold, steadied by defiance.
"You think you can blackmail me and walk away unscathed? I'm not afraid of you, Nathan."
Nathan sank back into his chair, the smug grin returning to his face, more pronounced this time. Nathan, his voice smooth, as if imparting a lesson.
"You should be, because if I go down, James, I'll drag you with me. And when that happens, Samantha won't get anything except her name dragged through the mud. She might be talented, but no one wants to work with someone connected to the scandal of James Carter."
James met Nathan's gaze, his own blazing with suppressed fury. He understood the kind of predator he was dealing with, one who thrived on manipulation and deceit. Any hasty move could backfire, hurting Samantha more than helping her. James cutting him off, voice sharp as a blade.
"You might think you're in control, Nathan, but don't forget it. All you've built rests on a foundation of lies. It will collapse, and when it does, I'll be there to watch."
Nathan shrugged, his expression remaining smug but with a flicker of unease. Nathan.
By all means try, but you'll find out soon enough. You're not as untouchable as you think.
James turned on his heel, each step heavy with restrained anger and bitter frustration. As the door closed behind him, he paused in the long corridor, the cold, sterile light from above casting sharp shadows on his face, a blend of defeat and unyielding determination. He stood motionless for a moment, fists still clenched, his breathing labored. The weight of the encounter pressed on him, but he knew this wasn't the end. Nathan might have won this round, but James was far from finished. Stepping into the elevator, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. His eyes, though weary, burned with an unrelenting fire.
If I can't break this wall,
he muttered to himself,
I'll find another way to tear it down.
As the elevator doors slid shut, he bowed his head, his fists tightening further. The image staring back at him was a man who had tasted bitter defeat but refused to give in. Deep within, his resolve hardened. Elsewhere in the city, Samantha sat in her small room, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting a warm light over the worn table where she held a pen in her hand. James might be trying to change something, but Samantha was still grappling with the emotions she had buried for so long. The turmoil in her heart urged her to write, as though putting words to paper might help her confront the past she had spent years trying to ignore. In her small, dimly lit room, Samantha sat at an old wooden desk, the warm glow of the desk lamp illuminating the blank page before her. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint scratch of her pen moving across the paper, each stroke heavy with unspoken thoughts. Beyond the window, the night sky blanketed the neighborhood, the faint glow of streetlights casting wavering shadows of trees swaying in the breeze. But within Samantha, a storm of emotions raged, impossible to ignore. Samantha thinking to herself, the pen trembling slightly in her hand.
James doesn't deserve this. I've dragged him into a whirlwind of trouble because of my past.
She set the pen down, her dark, deep eyes fixed on the line she had just written. In the letter, she poured out everything she had never said, her gratitude, her pain, and the guilt that had weighed on her for so long. Excerpt from the letter.
James, you don't have to do this for me. I know you're trying to make amends, but I don't want you to sacrifice anymore. Everything that has happened is my fault. If not for me, you wouldn't be entangled in this fight, facing the dangers Nathan is bringing upon you. I don't blame you, James, even though I've been hurt before. I know you're trying, but I can't let you keep getting involved because of me. The best thing I can do is leave, to let you handle everything your way without me. Thank you for everything. Don't look for me, James. Live well, the way you always have.
Samantha folded the letter carefully, placing it on the desk with the pen laid across it, a final punctuation to her decision. Rising from her chair, her gaze swept across the modest room that had been her sanctuary for so long. The bare walls, the sparse furnishings, they all seemed to hold their breath, bearing silent witness to her choice. She pulled a small suitcase from the corner, the wheels gliding softly across the wooden floor. The suitcase was light, but her heart felt unbearably heavy, burdened by the weight of all she was leaving behind. As she stepped outside, Samantha took a deep breath, the cool evening air brushing against her face. The street before her was quieter than usual, the amber glow of streetlights stretching across the pavement like trails of memories she was trying to leave behind. Samantha didn't look back as the door clicked shut behind her. She walked forward, one step at a time, the light catching her silhouette and the steady roll of the suitcase trailing behind. That night, as Samantha left her small apartment and the letter resting on the desk, the city continued its relentless pulse. But an emptiness lingered in the space she had vacated, a hollow echo of the emotions James would soon have to face. The next morning, in the high-rise office of Carter Enterprises, James sat silently at his desk, his gaze fixed on the sprawling city beyond the window. The glittering city lights had faded, replaced by the glow of a new day, but within him, the darkness still loomed. The sudden ringing of his phone jolted him from his thoughts. He glanced at the screen. Clara. James frowned, puzzled. He remembered Clara vaguely as a young lawyer who had once worked with Nathan, but he couldn't imagine why she was reaching out now. Picking up the call, James was greeted immediately by Clara's clear, confident voice. Clara.
James Carter, I need to meet with you. I have important information regarding Nathan and Samantha.
James sat in the corner of a small cafe, his gaze unfocused as he stared out at the bustling morning streets. The city moved with its usual urgency. Commuters hurried past the glass windows, their footsteps a rhythmic backdrop to the chaos in James's mind. The sting of his failed confrontation with Nathan and Samantha's unexpected disappearance weighed heavily on him. The door chime rang and a woman walked in. Her posture was straight, her attire professional but understated, a black blazer paired with dark jeans, exuding a quiet confidence. Her sharp eyes scanned the cafe quickly before settling on the corner table where James sat. Clara smiling as she approached.
James Carter, I hope I'm not interrupting.
James looked up, his expression briefly flickering with surprise before returning to its usual composure. James nodding.
Clara, isn't it? You said you had something to discuss about Nathan?
Clara took the seat across from him, placing her sleek bag neatly on the table. Leaning forward slightly, her gaze was keen, as if dissecting every move he made. Clara, her voice calm, deliberate.
That's right. I used to work with Nathan Alexander, but I severed ties with him long ago. The reason I'm here is that I have something you need, evident.
James frowned, his eyes flickering with a glimmer of hope, but his voice remained cautious. James.
Evidence? What kind of evidence?
Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive, placing it on the table between them. Clara.
I have internal documents proving that Nathan used his connection to you to manipulate Samantha Williams. That contract, it wasn't just unfair, it violated multiple legal statutes. Samantha was coerced, and Nathan deliberately hid it by leveraging your name as a shield.
James stared at the USB, his hands slowly curling into fists. A part of him felt relief at finally having a lead, but the anger bubbling within him toward Nathan grew more intense. James's tone tight with tension.
If you've had all of this, why didn't you come forward sooner? Why now?
Clara leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Her faint smile carried a hint of bitterness. Clara.
I was once part of Nathan's system, James. I know how he operates, the tricks he uses to cover his tracks, and yes, I trusted him, just like you did. When I uncovered the truth, I walked away. But exposing someone like Nathan isn't simple.
She paused, her expression hardening as she met his gaze directly. Clara.
I'm willing to help you, James. But before we go any further, I need one thing from you.
James's brow furrowing.
What's that?
Clara.
You need to be ready to face your own mistakes. Nathan can't manipulate people unless they leave the door open for him. You stayed silent in the past. Let things slide for the sake of your reputation and position. If you want to fix this, you'll need to confront that. Not just with Samantha, but with yourself.
Her words cut through James like a blade. He met her gaze, his own eyes shadowed by conflict. Deep down, he knew she was right. There was no escaping it. James's voice low but steady.
I understand. I'm not looking for an easy way out. If that's what it takes to set things right, I'm ready to face it.
Clara nodded, her sharp expression softening slightly. Clara.
Good. This USB contains everything we need to take Nathan down, but we have to be smart about it, one step at a time. If you're ready, I'll see this through with you to the end.
James picked up the USB, gripping it tightly in his hand. For the first time in what felt like ages, a glimmer of real hope sparked within him, fragile but undeniable. He looked up, his gaze resolute. James.
We'll do this, and this time, I won't back down.
Clara smiled faintly, a small but meaningful gesture. The two of them leaned in, beginning to discuss the steps ahead as the morning sunlight filtered through the cafe windows, casting a warm glow over a day that promised challenges, but also the possibility of redemption. James's office sat on the top floor of the tower, offering an unobstructed view of the cityscape below. Night had fallen, and the lights from skyscrapers glimmered against the vast glass window, casting their reflection into the quiet room. But James paid no attention to the dazzling panorama. He sat alone in his large leather chair, the spacious office now swallowed by an oppressive silence. Before him, his laptop screen glowed faintly, the reports and unread emails piling up ignored. His mind was consumed by thoughts of his conversation with Clara. Leaning back in his chair, arms folded across his chest, James stared at his reflection in the glass. The image was too familiar, a man of power and success, but tonight, he felt alienated from the person staring back at him. James thinking to himself, his eyes hollow.
What have I become? A man who only cared about himself, willing to trample over everything to get what he wanted. And in doing so, I lost her.
Memories of Samantha flooded his mind. Her laughter, the fiery passion in her eyes when she spoke of music, and the quiet disappointment in her gaze when she looked at him in their final days together. Each memory cut into him like a blade, sharper with every recollection. James's thoughts deepening, his chest tightening.
I stayed silent when she needed me most. I let her face everything alone, all because of my reputation.
He bowed his head, his fists clenching so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Clara had been right. Nathan had been able to exploit others because James had chosen to look the other way, to ignore the injustices he knew were wrong. He had let greed and selfishness blind him to what truly mattered. Now, with Samantha gone, and the fragile veneer of his success crumbling around him, James realized how hollow it all had been. Rising from his chair, James walked to the window, placing his hand against the cool glass. His gaze swept across the glowing city below. For the first time in years, he felt no desire to conquer the world out there. James speaking softly, almost to himself.
If I want to make things right, I have to change. Not just to earn her trust back, but to find myself.
In that moment, James felt a faint but real sense of release, as if acknowledging his failures lifted an invisible weight from his shoulders. He drew a deep breath, then turned back toward his desk. Picking up his phone, James scrolled through his contacts until the name,
Samantha,
appeared on the screen. His chest tightened at the sight of it. For a moment he hesitated, but then his expression hardened with resolve. James thinking,
this time silence won't be my answer.
He pressed the call button, his heart heavy but resolute. Whether she would accept his apology or not, James knew this was the first step he had to take to atone for the mistakes of his past. The next morning, James sat at his desk, clutching the letter Samantha had left behind. The words on the paper were clear, each one sinking deeper into his mind.
Don't look for me, James. Live well, as you always have.
But James knew he couldn't honor her request. He couldn't let her leave without knowing that he truly wanted to make things right. A week later, with Clara's assistance, she had not only provided evidence against Nathan, but also discreetly investigated Samantha's whereabouts. James finally had a lead. Samantha had been staying in a small town a few hours' drive from the city. Clara had discovered the information through a mutual acquaintance of Samantha's in the artist community. James wasted no time. Leaving his office immediately, he drove out to the quiet town. After hours of searching, he arrived at a small church where Clara had mentioned Samantha often played her violin when she sought solace. Inside the small church on the edge of the tranquil town, soft golden light filtered through stained glass windows, casting shimmering patterns on the stone floor. The space was silent, save for the gentle, haunting melody of a violin filling the air, tender yet brimming with emotion. In the center of the sanctuary, Samantha stood alone. Her eyes were closed as she let the music guide her, a wordless language that spoke of the pain she had long hidden away, something only she and her violin could truly understand. The creak of the church door broke the stillness, the faint sound of hinges cutting through the melody. Samantha's bow stopped mid-stroke as her eyes opened and turned toward the sound. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the faint glow of the outside world, was James. The light behind him framed his face somber, resolute, and marked by a quiet guilt. Samantha's expression flickered with surprise but quickly hardened into a cold, distant mask. Samantha, her voice soft but icy.
"James, you found me?"
James stepped slowly inside, his footsteps echoing faintly on the stone floor. He kept a respectful distance, careful not to intrude too forcefully on her space. James's voice low, earnest.
"Samantha, I'm not here to disrupt your peace. I'm here to say what I should have said long ago."
Samantha placed her violin gently on a nearby table, her dark eyes fixed on him, guarded and wary. Samantha, her tone sharp.
"What more is there to say, James? You've already said enough with your silence. You let it speak for you in every moment I needed you most."
Her words cut deep, but James didn't falter. He drew a deep breath, his hands clenched tightly at his sides as he fought to keep his voice steady. James's tone low, heavy with emotion.
"You're right. I failed you, Samantha. I let my pride and ambition blind me to what really mattered. I stayed silent, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid. Afraid of losing what I'd built, afraid of tarnishing the reputation I thought was it. And in my selfishness, I left you to face everything alone."
Samantha didn't respond immediately, her expression flickering with something unspoken before settling back into calm detachment. James continuing, his voice firm.
"I'm not here to make excuses. All I want to say is, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not standing by you when you needed me most. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to protect the person I loved."
Samantha folded her arms across her chest, her gaze unwavering as she regarded him. Samantha, her voice cold.
"Do you think a simple apology can undo everything, James? Do you know what I endured? The whispers, the judgmental looks, the feeling of being abandoned by the one person I thought I could count on?"
James bowed his head, his face etched with regret. James's voice low, trembling.
"I know, Samantha, and I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to forget the pain I caused, but I need you to know that despite everything, I've always admired you, your resilience, your talent, your passion. Don't let anyone, not even me, make you abandon your music. It's the most beautiful part of you, and you deserve to keep it."
A heavy silence fell between them, broken only by the faint rustling of the wind outside. The muted light from the stained glass illuminated Samantha's contemplative face as she turned away, her hands reaching for her violin. Samantha softly, without turning back.
"James, do you know what I've learned from all of this? Never wait for someone to stand by you. In the end, the only person you can truly rely on is yourself."
She lifted the bow and placed it against the strings. The first notes rang out gentle, mournful, yet resolute. The melody carried an answer that words could not fully express, a mix of pain and defiance, sorrow and determination. James took a few steps back, standing silently in the stillness of the church. Though Samantha's gaze remained guarded and distant, he knew she hadn't entirely shut him out. For now, that was enough, a fragile sliver of hope to fuel his determination to make things right. As he stepped out of the church, James took a deep breath, the cool evening air bracing against his skin. Samantha had kept her distance, but her silence was not a complete rejection. It was enough to remind him that his journey to redemption was far from over. Returning to town, James's phone buzzed with a new message from Clara.
"Nathan's making moves. I think it's time to increase the pressure. Meet me at the office tomorrow morning."
Reading the message, James's eyes hardened with resolve. Nathan remained the largest obstacle, and if he wanted to reclaim what rightfully belonged to Samantha, there could be no hesitation. The next morning, James stepped into the neutral office space where Clara had already laid the groundwork for the confrontation ahead. He knew this fight wasn't just for Samantha, it was his chance to face and amend the mistakes of his past. In the expansive conference room with glass walls overlooking the city, neon lights from distant skyscrapers reflected off the polished wood of the long table, where three people faced each other. The air in the room was heavy with tension, so thick it felt like even a single misstep could ignite a firestorm. Nathan sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed, but his hands clenched subtly as if trying to suppress the unease simmering within. Across from him sat Clara, sharp and self-assured, with a thick folder neatly placed before her. Beside her was James, his piercing gaze fixed on Nathan with unrelenting determination. Nathan smirking, his tone laced with mockery.
How amusing to see you, James, putting so much effort into something. Let's call it trivial. Don't you think this is a waste of time? I haven't done anything wrong. The contract was signed, and everything is perfectly legal.
Clara didn't flinch. She opened the folder with deliberate precision, each movement emphasizing the meticulous planning behind her every step. Clara calmly, her voice carrying quiet authority.
Mr. Nathan, you may be confident in that claim, but these documents tell an entirely different story.
She pulled out a printed email and slid it toward Nathan, her finger pointing to a bolded line. Clara.
This is one of the emails you sent to Samantha Williams, using threatening language to coerce her into signing the contract. And this...
She lifted another document and placed it beside the first. Clara.
Is the illegal clause you added to the agreement, exploiting the fact that Samantha didn't have legal representation. Did you really think this would go unnoticed forever?
Nathan raised an eyebrow but quickly recovered, his smirk returning with practiced ease. Nathan, his voice cold.
You think this will trouble me? And let's not forget, James, if this whole mess comes to light, you won't escape unscathed either. Carter Enterprises hasn't always been spotless, has it?
James leaned forward, his hands firmly pressed against the table. His eyes, steely and unyielding, betrayed no hesitation. James's voice sharp and resolute.
I don't care what happens to me. If this is what it takes to bring justice to Samantha, I'm willing to face whatever comes my way. But make no mistake, Nathan, the first to fall will be you, not me.
Nathan faltered slightly, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. Clara seized the moment, her tone cutting like a blade. Clara.
We're not here to threaten you, Nathan. We're here to offer you a chance to do the right thing. Sign this document and return the rights to Samantha's composition, and this all ends here. No courtrooms, no media, no scandal. You can walk away unscathed.
She slid the document and a pen across the table toward him, her faint smile carrying an air of finality. Clara coolly.
The choice is yours.
Nathan stared at the papers before him, then at James and Clara. For a fleeting moment, anger and helplessness flashed across his face. Finally, he snatched the pen, pressing it to the paper with a force that betrayed his frustration. Nathan, his voice a low growl.
Fine, but don't think this means you've won. Remember, James, this game isn't over.
James said nothing. He simply picked up the signed document, meticulously checking every signature and clause. Satisfied, he closed the folder and nodded to Clara. James's tone steady.
What matters is that Samantha finally gets back what's hers.
Nathan didn't respond. His darkened eyes smoldered with unspoken fury as he watched them leave. As James stepped out of the building, the signed documents in his hand, a blend of relief and determination filled him. But he knew this was only a small piece of the journey. There was still much left to do. On the drive back, the streetlights cast fleeting glows through the car window, illuminating his face in passing flashes. James glanced down at the folder resting beside him, the words,
Transfer of ownership agreement,
standing out starkly. He took a deep breath. This wasn't just about ownership or legality, it was about everything Samantha had lost and everything he had failed to protect. This time he would return it to her, not as a gesture of pity, but as a promise, a commitment to right his wrongs, one step at a time. The next morning, as the sun climbed higher into the sky, James parked in front of Samantha's apartment. The folder rested firmly in his hand, its weight a constant reminder of the responsibility he bore. Taking a moment to collect himself, he climbed the steps, his heart a mix of hope and trepidation, and knocked on the door. Inside Samantha's small apartment, the fading afternoon light streamed through the window, casting pale streaks across the wooden floor. The stillness of the space was profound, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves outside. Then came a knock at the door, sharp and clear, cutting through the silence. Samantha stepped out of the kitchen, her slender frame wrapped in a thin sweater. She opened the door and froze for a moment. Standing before her was James, holding a large envelope in his hand, his expression a mix of determination and quiet hesitation. James gently,
"Samantha, I believe this belongs to you."
He extended the envelope toward her. Samantha hesitated for a brief moment before taking it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it, pulling out the papers inside. Her eyes locked onto the bold title transfer of ownership agreement. The words were unmistakable, and her hands quivered as she read further. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she flipped through the pages carefully, scrutinizing each line as if trying to ensure it wasn't a cruel trick or an illusion. Samantha, her voice soft, laced with emotion.
How did you do this?"
James straightened, his tone steady but full of sincerity. "James,
"I did the right thing, and I didn't do it alone. Clara helped me a lot. But Samantha, the most important thing is that it's yours again. It always was, and no one ever had the right to take it from you."
Samantha set the papers on the nearby table, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and inner conflict. Samantha speaking slowly.
"Thank you, James. This is something I never thought I'd have back."
James nodded, but his gaze lingered on her, searching for any sign and unspoken word, a softening glance that might offer him a glimmer of hope for forgiveness. James earnestly,
"I didn't do this to ask for your forgiveness. I did it because you deserve to have what's rightfully yours. You don't have to say or do anything. I just want you to know I'm trying to make amends."
Samantha held his gaze for a long moment. Her eyes were no longer as cold as before, but they still carried caution. Samantha softly, but keeping her distance.
"James, I see what you're trying to do, and I know this wasn't easy for you, but..."
She paused, her eyes drifting toward the window, searching for the right words. Samantha quietly,
"That doesn't mean everything can go back to the way it was. The wounds, they're still there. I need time."
James remained silent, absorbing her words. He nodded, accepting her response even though it wasn't the one he had hoped for. James steadily,
"I understand, and I don't expect you to forget what happened, but I'll be here whenever you're ready."
Samantha turned away, placing the documents into a drawer as if carefully tucking away a part of her past. When she turned back, her gaze was still distant, a silent reminder that trust wasn't something he could reclaim so easily. Samantha gently but firmly,
"Thank you, James, but you don't need to come here anymore. My life, it's fine as it is, and I don't want things to get complicated."
James inhaled deeply, masking the ache that swelled in his chest. James forcing a faint smile.
"I understand. Even so, I'll keep trying, Samantha."
As James left the apartment, the sunset outside faded, casting a warm yet fleeting glow over the city. He stopped in the hallway, his hands clenching at his sides, a renewed sense of resolve settling over him. Even though Samantha remained distant, James knew this wasn't the end. It was a small step forward, a flicker of light guiding him through the long path of redemption he had chosen. In Nathan's expansive office, the faint glow from a desk lamp cast long shadows over the disorganized piles of documents. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline glittered with lights, but inside this room, darkness reigned, heavy with the stifling air of hatred and vengeance. Nathan sat in his leather chair behind the massive desk, his hands resting on a stack of papers. His gaze, sharp and calculating, fixated on a set of old files marked with red tabs. The papers detailed financial transactions from Carter Enterprises, along with internal emails he had secretly collected during his partnership with James. Nathan muttering, his voice dripping with malice.
"You think you can beat me, James? It won't be that easy."
He picked up one of the papers, his eyes scanning lines that documented suspicious payments tied to a past investment project. These were deals James had reluctantly approved under pressure from investors, and Nathan knew that if this information were made public, it could shatter not just James's reputation, but also the foundation of Carter Enterprises. Nathan reached for his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. Nathan, his voice low and cold.
"I need a meeting with the press. No, not just one article. I want every major outlet to have this story. Yes, this week. I've got material they won't be able to ignore."
He placed the phone down, a smirk curling across his lips. There was no rush. Nathan understood that bringing down someone like James required patience and ruthlessness. Pouring himself a glass of red wine, he swirled the liquid in the glass, its deep crimson hue reflecting the sinister intricacies of his plan. Nathan softly, with venom.
"You wanted to play fair, James? But the world isn't fair, and I'm going to make sure you learn that the hard way."
He turned to look out the window, his gaze piercing through the city's glittering nightscape. In his mind, he envisioned dismantling everything James was desperately trying to rebuild. In Nathan's office, the dim light illuminated his smug expression. His plan for revenge was meticulously crafted, every detail ready to unfold. All that remained was the moment to play his trump card and obliterate everything James was fighting to reclaim. Elsewhere in the city, darkness blanketed Carter Enterprises. On the top floor, the light from James's office remained aglow, standing out amidst the sea of darkened windows across the towering building. Late at night, the light in James's office on the top floor of Carter Enterprises remained aglow. The stark white glow from his desk lamp illuminated the cluttered mess of documents and scattered notes, mirroring the turmoil within him. Beyond the window, the city stretched out in a blanket of golden lights, glittering but coldly indifferent. James sat in his chair, absently twirling a fountain pen between his fingers. Before him lay a sheet of paper neatly titled Resignation Letter, his signature conspicuously absent. His eyes lingered on the page, reflecting weariness and inner conflict. The steady ticking of the clock on the wall filled the silence, a relentless reminder that time was slipping away. He knew that by morning, during the press conference, everything he had spent years building could crumble. The shadowy financial transactions Nathan threatened to expose weren't lies. They were decisions James had made, born of ambition and the lure of short-term gains under immense pressure. James murmuring, his voice low.
"I should have faced this a long time ago."
He set the pen down and ran his hands through his hair, the weight of his choices pressing heavily on him. Fear gripped him tightly, whispering that by tomorrow he could lose everything: his reputation, his career, and even the chance to make amends for his past. But deep down, James knew that if he didn't confront this head-on, he would lose something far greater: himself. Taking a deep breath, his eyes drifted to a photo tucked in the corner of his desk. It was a picture of him and Samantha during their happier days, her radiant smile beside his. The image felt like a haunting reminder of all he once had, of everything his mistakes had cost him. James rose from his chair and walked to the large window, his gaze following the stream of headlights below, weaving through the night. The city, alive and oblivious, carried on, unaware of the storm brewing that could consume him by dawn. Returning to his desk, his eyes fell once more on the resignation letter. Picking up the pen, he paused, hovering over the empty space where his signature would go. But instead of signing, he set the pen aside. James whispering, his voice steady.
"If this is the price for redemption, then I'm ready to pay it."
He folded the letter and tucked it into a drawer, a quiet declaration that he was prepared to accept the consequences. With renewed resolve, James powered on his computer, and began drafting his statement for the press conference. This time, he vowed, there would be no running. As the night deepened, the light in his office shone brightly against the darkness outside, a lone beacon defying the shadows that threatened to engulf him. The press conference room at Carter Enterprises was packed. Rows of chairs were neatly arranged, yet they couldn't accommodate the crowd gathered inside. Journalists lined the walls, holding recorders and pens, their eyes fixed on the podium. The flicker of cameras and the relentless glow of flashes added to the suffocating tension, a prelude to the monumental announcement everyone was anticipating. The hum of murmured conversation stilled as the side door opened. James Carter stepped in, tall and composed in his black suit, his every movement deliberate. His face was calm yet inscrutable, a mask that betrayed little of the storm within. A hushed silence swept through the room, as if the entire audience had collectively held their breath. James walked to the podium, his gaze sweeping across the room. He met eyes filled with judgment, curiosity, and concerned journalists, company employees, and long-standing business partners. The weight of their stares was palpable, but for the first time, James felt no fear. James' voice steady, clear.
Thank you all for being here today. I know this press conference is not what anyone expected and perhaps not what you want to hear, but I am standing here not to defend myself, but to acknowledge my mistakes.
The room seemed frozen in time. A few eyebrows rose, and the soft clicks of cameras echoed faintly. Journalists flipped open their notebooks, bracing for what James would say next. James stronger, more resolute.
Over the years, I have made decisions that I knew were wrong. Shady deals, unethical benefits, I agreed to accept. These actions not only contradicted the values Carter Enterprises claims to stand for, but marked a personal failure on my part to uphold what is right.
James paused, his hands gripping the edge of the podium as though grounding himself. He glanced down at his hands, faintly trembling, but he refused to falter. James lower, with raw honesty.
Nathan Alexander, a former partner of mine, exploited our personal and professional relationship to carry out unethical actions, including coercing Samantha Williams, a gifted artist, into signing an unfair contract. I knew about this, but I did nothing. I stayed silent when I should have spoken up.
A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Eyebrows arched higher, some exchanged pointed glances, while the clatter of laptop keys grew louder as reporters scrambled to capture every word. But James pressed on. His gaze locked onto the cameras, his eyes reflecting both sincerity and deep regret. James,
today I stand before you not to make excuses, but to take responsibility. My poor decisions have not only harmed those I was entrusted to protect, but have eroded the trust that many of you, my colleagues, my partners, and my supporters once placed.
A breathless silence followed, stretching across the room. James reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a piece of paper, holding it up with deliberate care. James firm, unwavering.
Therefore, I am announcing my resignation as CEO of Carter Enterprises, effective immediately.
The room seemed to freeze. The rhythmic typing ceased abruptly, and every eye turned toward James in stunned disbelief. A few gasps escaped the crowd, and whispers began to spread like wildfire. James softer but resolute.
I hope that with this action, I can begin to atone for my failures, not only to Samantha, but to everyone who once believed in me. I am sorry for what has happened, and I thank you all for listening.
James bowed his head, holding the silence for a moment longer before stepping away from the podium. Without looking back, he walked toward the exit, his stride steady and resolute. Behind him, the room erupted into noise, reporters shouting questions, partners whispering fervently among themselves. But James heard none of it. His mind was clear, and within him was an unfamiliar sense of lightness, relief. His eyes carried a strange serenity, as though he had finally shed a burden that had weighed him down for years. James knew things would never be the same. He might lose his reputation, his power, and the career he had built. But for the first time in years, James felt like he was walking on the right path. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. In Nathan's expansive yet cold office, the dim light from a large screen cast stark shadows over his tense face. The screen played back the footage from James's press conference, the deep, steady cadence of James's voice echoing in the silent room. James on screen.
I hereby resign as CEO of Carter Enterprises, effective immediately.
With a flick of the remote, Nathan turned off the screen, but his eyes lingered on the now black display. James's words echoed in his mind, a slow, deliberate blade cutting through his pride. Nathan muttering, voice low and venomous.
That bastard, he got ahead of me.
He shot up from his chair, the leather squealing as it rolled back sharply. His hands gripped the edge of the desk so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Before him lay a chaotic spread of papers, financial records, old emails, and documents he had once considered his ultimate leverage. Now they were little more than useless scraps. Nathan growling, voice thick with rage.
Damn it, all of this is worthless.
He grabbed a stack of files, flipping through the pages as though hoping to find something he'd overlooked. The more he looked, the more futile it all felt. With a furious yell, he hurled the documents across the room. Pages fluttered in the air, suspended for a brief moment before scattering across the floor like withered leaves. Nathan spun back toward his desk and slammed his fist against its polished surface. The sharp sound reverberated through the room, mirroring his uncontrollable anger. Nathan shouting, nearly a roar.
He destroyed himself just to ruin my plan. How the hell didn't I see this coming? How?
He collapsed into his chair, his hands gripping his head, his breath ragged. Images of James standing at the podium, calmly owning his mistakes, replayed in his mind like a looped nightmare he couldn't escape. Nathan whispering, his voice bitter and shaken.
Self-destruction. And he took everything from me. He turned it all into garbage.
Leaning back in his chair, Nathan stared up at the ceiling. Anger and panic twisted in his chest, gnawing away at what little remained of his once unshakable pride. He had poured all his hatred, every calculated move, into destroying James. Yet now, James had flipped the board with an act of defiance Nathan never saw coming. Reaching for the glass of red wine on his desk, Nathan lifted it to his lips, hoping to steady himself. But as soon as the glass touched his mouth, he hurled it to the floor in frustration. The shattering of glass punctuated the silence, the crimson liquid spreading across the white tiles like streaks of blood. Nathan voiced low and seething, his eyes blazing with fury.
It can't end like this. It's not over.
He began pacing the room like a wounded animal, his eyes darting to the scattered papers on the floor. No matter how he tried to convince himself otherwise, the truth loomed large and undeniable. Everything he had done was for nothing. Nathan slumped into the chair, the room now a battlefield of shattered glass, crimson wine stains spreading like wounds, and scattered, tattered papers strewn across the floor. His eyes, bloodshot with rage and helplessness, betrayed a deeper, unmistakable terror. In the gloom of the room, the usual aura of arrogance and self-assurance that clung to him like a second skin was gone. All that remained was a broken man, a defeated soul, choking on a failure he had never imagined he would have to face. James pushed open the door to the office, once the heart of Carter Enterprises' power, and was immediately engulfed by an eerie silence. The familiar room remained unchanged, yet something was profoundly different. No more incessant ringing phones, no hurried footsteps echoing down the hallway, no urgent knocks from assistants bearing documents requiring his immediate signature. All that remained was an unsettling stillness, as if the office itself was solemnly awaiting his final farewell. He stepped further in, closing the door gently behind him. The sound of it latching reverberated through the empty space, a quiet goodbye between him and the place he had called his own for so many years. Setting his briefcase on the desk, James let his eyes wander, lingering on every familiar corner of the room. The high-backed leather chair, where he had spent countless hours strategizing, now sat vacant. The abstract painting on the wall, once a source of inspiration during moments of doubt, was now just an inert decoration. On the desk, his nameplate,
James Carter, CEO,
lay still, a relic of an identity that no longer belonged to him. James walked slowly to the large window. Morning light spilled through the glass, casting a golden glow over the city. The city was still vibrant, still bustling, still alive. But for him, it no longer evoked the pride and power it once did. Instead, it was a stark reminder that life moves forward, indifferent to who stays or leaves. He sighed, his gaze drifting back to the desk. There, his resignation letter sat neatly alongside an old photograph. He picked up the photo, his fingers gently tracing the radiant face of Samantha. It was a moment of happiness from long ago, when they were young, full of dreams, and unwavering in their belief in the future they would build together. James pulled out the chair and sat down. His hands clasped together, elbows resting on the desk, his eyes fixed on the emptiness before him. James whispering softly,
power, prestige. None of it matters anymore. The only thing that matters now is doing what's right, for Samantha, for my child, and for myself.
The words, though simple, brought a peace to his heart that he hadn't felt in years. Losing his position, his company, and the fruits of his labor no longer frightened him. Instead, it felt like a release, a chance to begin anew, unshackled by the weight of his past mistakes. He picked up the resignation letter and read the heartfelt words he had written the night before. James reading silently.
I understand that my decisions will have difficult repercussions for Carter Enterprises, but I believe this company will thrive thanks to all of you, the incredible people who helped me build it from the ground up. Apologize for my mistakes and thank you for standing by me throughout this journey.
Holding the letter, he placed it carefully on the desk, a final act of closure. Rising from his chair, James felt lighter than he had in years. There was no regret, no fear, only a quiet resolve to right the wrongs he had left in his wake. Turning back to the room, James took one last look. Every corner, every object, was a reminder of a long, tumultuous journey. But that journey had reached its end. James softly, as if to himself,
it's time to start over.
He walked out, gently shutting the door behind him. The sound of it closing carried the weight of an ending, but it also signaled the opening of a new chapter in his life. As he stepped into the elevator, James didn't look back. The soft glow of the buttons illuminated his face, highlighting the determination in his eyes. He was no longer James Carter, CEO of Carter Enterprises. He was simply James, a father, a former husband seeking redemption, and a man ready to rebuild from the ruins. As the elevator doors closed, James felt a profound sense of relief wash over him, as if he had finally shed a burden he had carried for far too long. The road ahead would not be easy, but he knew, deep down, that he had made the right choice. Elsewhere in the city, the atmosphere was entirely different. In Nathan's office, the shadows of betrayal and collapse were slowly consuming everything. What had once granted him power was now the very force dragging him into the abyss. At that moment, hurried footsteps echoed down the hallway outside his office. Police officers, their faces cold and resolute, approached with purpose. The door to Nathan's office burst open with a force that shattered the silence, marking the moment when his lies and schemes had finally reached their inevitable reckoning. Nathan's office blazed with light, the golden glow of an elegant desk lamp casting sharp reflections against the cold glass walls. Inside, he lounged in his black leather chair, a glass of red wine swirling in his hand, his piercing gaze fixed on the computer screen. On the screen were financial reports and documents, tools he still believed would restore his dominance. Nathan muttering smugly.
James thinks he's won, but one small misstep and this game will be back in my hands.
He sipped the wine, set the glass down, and leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs with an air of triumph. In his mind, he remained in control, like a tiger lying in wait for the perfect moment to pounce. Yet unbeknownst to him, the threads of fate had long since begun unraveling. A knock on the door rang out, short and firm. Nathan frowning, voice cold.
"Come in."
But instead of an assistant, the door burst open with force, causing him to freeze. Several men in police uniforms strode in, their sharp eyes scanning the room. Their footsteps echoed with authority, shattering the fragile stillness. Nathan raising an eyebrow, voice dripping with sarcasm.
"Who are you? This is a private office. You can't just barge in without a warrant."
One of the officers stepped forward, holding out an arrest warrant for him to see. Officer firmly.
"Nathan Alexander, you are under arrest for financial fraud, extortion, and unlawful coercion. This is a warrant issued by the..."
Nathan shot to his feet, his chair scraping back with a loud screech. For a brief moment, surprise flickered across his face, only to be replaced by seething anger. Nathan snarling.
"Fraud, extortion? This is absurd. Do you even know who I am? I'll call my lawyer immediately."
He reached for the phone on his desk, but an officer stepped forward, blocking his path with an unyielding stare. Officer Cooley.
"We have all the evidence we need to charge you. You'll have your chance to talk to a lawyer at this..."
Another officer placed a stack of documents on the desk, threatening emails, shady contracts, and incriminating financial transactions, all meticulously compiled from the files Clara had provided. Nathan stared at them, his eyes widening in disbelief and panic. Nathan, voice breaking.
"No, this can't be. Who gave you these? This is a setup, a conspiracy against me."
He stumbled back, gripping the edge of his chair tightly. The arrogance that had defined him was now replaced by a barely concealed desperation. Nathan shouting, voice desperate.
"You can't do this. I'll sue all of you. I have power. I have money. No one can touch me."
But his words rang hollow, dissipating into the silence of the room. An officer stepped forward, handcuffs glinting under the light. Officer.
"Hands out, Mr. Alexander."
Nathan backed away, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But in the confines of this office, there was nowhere to run. The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, and Nathan slumped, his resistance and threats fading into quiet defeat. As Nathan was escorted out of the office, the employees outside paused, their heads turning in unison. Whispers rippled through the air like an undercurrent of disbelief. Grace whispering to a colleague.
"That's Nathan Alexander. Is he really being arrested?"
Paul nodding, voice low.
"Yeah. Word is, he's involved in a lot of scandals. I didn't think it'd come crashing down so fast."
Nathan kept his head down, his steps heavy as he followed the officers. The arrogance and swagger that once defined him had vanished entirely. As he was led out of the building, the daylight struck his pale face, illuminating the emptiness in his eyes. The murmurs behind him grew faint, as though the world he once ruled had slipped far out of reach. As the police car pulled away, taking Nathan and the weight of his crimes with it, a dark chapter in the saga of Carter Enterprises came to a close. Yet the light of truth shone not only on Nathan but also on others entangled in his web, forcing them to confront their own complicity. In another corner of the city, James Carter was preparing for a moment that would define him, a moment to stand before the investigative council, where the truth would be laid bare, not only about Nathan but also about the choices James himself had made in the past. No longer evading, no longer justifying, James was ready to face the consequences, knowing this was the final step in his journey to amend his wrongs and seek true redemption. The investigation council's meeting room was vast, yet the atmosphere inside felt oppressively heavy, suffocating even. The long table, draped in pristine white cloth, stretched before James Carter. Behind it sat the council members, their faces stern, their sharp gazes tracking his every move. James sat at the head of the table, his back straight, his gaze steady despite the exhaustion etched into his features. In front of him were a microphone, the secretary's notebook, and a towering stack of files, evidence of Carter Enterprises' past illegal dealings. Council chair in a stern voice.
Mr. Carter, we've reviewed the entirety of the documents you provided. Now we need your honesty. Were you aware of these transactions as they occurred?
James lifted his eyes, meeting theirs without flinching. He took a deep breath, bracing himself for the truth he was about to deliver. James in a deep, clear voice.
Yes, I knew.
A ripple of murmurs swept through the council members. One raised an eyebrow, another glanced down at the files, as though double-checking the facts. But James did not waver. James continuing, voice firm.
I knew these transactions were wrong. I knew they violated the principles I had sworn to uphold. But I let the pressures of the job and the allure of short-term gains cloud my judgment. That was my failure, and I take full responsibility for it.
The room fell silent. The council chair flipped through a few pages of the documents, their gaze remaining sharp and unyielding. Council chair.
Then, will you cooperate with us in exposing the others involved in these transactions?
James nodding.
I have cooperated and will continue to do so, not just out of legal obligation, but because I want to make things right, even if it may already be too late.
Another council member, a sharp-eyed middle-aged woman, leaned forward. Her voice calm yet severe, cut through the room. Council member.
Mr. Carter, do you understand that even with your admission of guilt and cooperation, your decisions have caused severe damage to Carter Enterprises' reputation?
James nodded, a shadow of sadness crossing his face. James.
I do. And for that reason, I voluntarily stepped down, handing over leadership to a new board. This company deserves a chance to rebuild, unburdened by the mistakes of my past.
The council members exchanged glances, their silent deliberations carrying a weight of judgment. After a moment, the chair tapped lightly on the table to regain attention. Council chair.
Mr. Carter, we have reviewed your testimony and all submitted evidence. While the infractions are indeed serious, your cooperation and candor have allowed us to resolve this case swiftly. The council has decided not to pursue criminal charges against you, but you will no longer hold control or have any role in the management of Carter Enterprises.
James inhaled deeply, bowing his head slightly in acceptance. He didn't smile, nor did he show relief, but there was a quiet peace in his eyes. James.
Thank you, Chair. I understand and respect your decision.
As he stood, the council members' gazes followed him. Some remained stern, while others softened slightly with a hint of empathy. James walked out of the room, the door closing behind him with a finality that seemed to seal his past away. He paused in the hallway, his eyes drawn to the large window where daylight poured through. The weight on his chest seemed to lift, replaced by a profound lightness, like he had finally laid down a burden he'd carried for far too long. James thinking.
I've lost the company, but I've regained something far more important, the chance to begin again and make things.
As James stepped out of the building, the brilliant sunlight enveloped him, a stark contrast to the shadows he had been living under. Gone were the pressures of power and prestige. Instead, he felt the refreshing weightlessness of starting anew, even if the road ahead was uncertain. Within him stirred a deep resolve to mend the damage he had caused, not just to himself but also to the woman he had once loved and lost. With that thought, James walked on, not toward a luxurious office or another tense meeting, but to a place far simpler. A quiet park, where he knew Samantha often went to play her violin, to feel the music, and to seek peace. It was there he hoped to begin a new conversation, not as a powerful man, but as James, a man striving to atone. The gentle glow of dusk bathed the park in golden light, with the sun's last rays shimmering through the green canopy of leaves. Samantha sat on a wooden bench near the playground, her hands resting lightly on her lap. Her soft gaze followed her young son as he ran across the grass, his laughter ringing out like a delicate melody that perfectly complemented the peaceful evening. The boy's deep, dark eyes mirrored hers, filled with a quiet intensity. Yet whenever he smiled, that playful brightness reminded Samantha of James. No matter how hard she tried, his presence lingered in her life, through that very smile, a smile that brought both joy and a bittersweet ache. She sighed softly, a fleeting smile brushing her lips, a smile tinged with both hope and apprehension. The crunch of measured footsteps on the gravel path drew her out of her thoughts. She looked up, her eyes meeting James's. He stood tall, his formal suit replaced by a simple white shirt, his expression sincere yet hesitant. James gently.
"Hello, Samantha?"
Samantha didn't respond right away. She glanced back at her son, who was happily playing with a ball, ensuring he was safe. After a moment, she nodded slightly, her gaze softening. "Samantha."
"You found us."
James took a deep breath, as if summoning courage, then stepped closer. He sat on the bench, keeping a respectful distance that conveyed his understanding of her guardedness. James in a low voice.
"I don't want to intrude, but I need to say this. Since I began this journey to right my wrongs, you and our son have been the only things on my mind."
He paused, his eyes briefly meeting hers before shifting to the boy playing in the distance. James's voice catching.
"I know, I failed as a father and a partner. I have no right to ask for anything, but I hope you can give me a chance."
Samantha turned to face him, her eyes no longer cold as they had been during their past encounters. Instead, there was a cautious deliberation in her gaze. Samantha calmly, yet deeply.
"James, you've done things I never expected. You gave up power, faced your mistakes, and even fought to set things right for me. Honestly, I didn't believe you had it in you."
She paused, her expression softening as she continued. "Samantha."
"But you did, and it moved me."
James lowered his head, as if her words were the absolution he had long awaited. James's voice trembling.
"I don't want to atone with words alone. I want to prove that I can be better, not for myself, but for you and our son."
Samantha fell silent, her eyes drifting toward the child. He was gleefully tossing the ball into the air, chasing after it with unbridled laughter. Samantha quietly.
"That boy deserves a father, and perhaps you deserve a chance to be one. But James, this won't be easy. We need time, and I need to see that you're truly ready for this."
James lifted his head, his eyes brightening with a hope he hadn't dared to feel in so long. James firmly.
"I'll do whatever it takes, Samantha. Anything."
Samantha studied him for a long moment, her expression softening further. Finally, she nodded. "Samantha."
"All right, you can be part of our lives. But James, remember this. Our son needs a real father. I won't forgive you if you let him down."
James said nothing more. He simply nodded, his gaze filled with emotion. Slowly, he extended his hand, a silent promise. Samantha hesitated, her eyes flickering to his hand, but eventually she placed hers in his. In that moment, the golden sunset bathed them both, illuminating the world around them as if blessing this fragile new beginning. In the distance, the boy continued playing, unaware that, in this fleeting instant, a new family had begun to take shape step by step, built on sincerity, trust, and the shared resolve of the two adults. James gently squeezed Samantha's hand, his eyes brimming with a happiness he hadn't known in years, not from power, fame, or success, but from rediscovering what truly mattered. As the twilight deepened, Samantha slowly withdrew her hand, not with the coldness of before, but with an understanding and acceptance that spoke volumes. Together, they looked toward their son, whose radiant laughter seemed to embody hope and the promise of a fresh start. Time passed, and James didn't just become the kind of father his son could be proud of, he also became a genuine partner to Samantha. With James's steadfast support and the trust rebuilt through his actions, Samantha found herself stepping into the light once more, her music no longer a mere means of healing but a way to shine. That night, under the brilliance of stage lights, Samantha stood before an audience. The sound of her violin filled the air, a melody woven from the strength of the past and the faith in a future still unfolding. The stage lights blazed down, illuminating Samantha at its center, a figure both commanding and graceful. In her hands was the violin she had cherished since her youth, a symbol of dreams, heartbreak, and the strength she had discovered in herself through it all. Her deep sapphire gown cascaded elegantly over her slender frame, its shimmering patterns catching the light, making her appear like a star against the dark canvas of the stage. Her long hair fell in soft waves, stirred gently by the cool breeze from the overhead vents, accentuating her poise and the quiet majesty of an artist in her element. The auditorium was packed to capacity, every seat filled. All eyes were on her, filled with anticipation and quiet reverence. Samantha felt their focus keenly, but instead of pressure, she felt an unfamiliar calm. This wasn't the first time she stood on stage, yet it was the first time she felt she truly belonged. In the front row, James sat beside their young son. His eyes brimmed with pride, though a glimmer of emotion he couldn't quite contain lingered beneath the surface. The boy stood on his seat, clutching the railing before him with both hands, his gaze fixed on his mother, alight with eager admiration. Samantha closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. For a moment, time seemed to pause. When she opened her eyes again, everything the past, the pain, the joy flowed into the bow in her hand. She drew the bow across the strings, and the first note resonated through the hall. The melody began soft and tender, like a whisper, weaving a tale she had never spoken aloud. The sound filled the air, pulling the audience into a journey of emotions. The opening notes carried the weight of profound sorrow, the silent tears she had shed on countless lonely nights when everything seemed shattered beyond repair. The music trembled like the heavy steps of a woman struggling forward, even as her heart was torn. Then, the melody shifted. The slow, somber tones began to quicken, gaining strength, like a glimmer of light piercing through the darkness. Samantha opened her eyes, and they sparkled with renewed vitality. The violin sang with vigor, its rhythm mirroring the heartbeat of a soul rediscovering hope in music, in her child and in herself. As the piece reached its crescendo, the notes exploded with clarity and passion. Each stroke of the bow declared triumph. Each beat proclaimed that Samantha had overcome. Pain was no longer her burden, but the wellspring of her creativity and the source of her brilliance. When the music softened toward the end, the tones became warm and tender, a gentle farewell to the past and a welcoming embrace of the future. The final notes lingered in the air, imbued with a happiness that wasn't fleeting or shallow, but full and deep, crafted from loss, forgiveness, and gratitude. Samantha lowered her bow, her hands trembling with the weight of her emotions. She bowed deeply to the audience, her chest rising and falling, as if she had completed a long, arduous journey, one of profound meaning. For a moment, the hall was silent. Then, like a thunderclap, applause erupted, filling the room with its force. One by one, the audience rose to their feet, their faces alight with emotion. They weren't merely applauding an artist, they were honoring a story, a testament to the power of resilience and courage. Samantha lifted her head, tears glistening in her eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of pure, unbridled joy. The thunderous applause roared through the auditorium like a tidal wave, filling the radiant space with a symphony of passion and admiration. James sat in the front row, his arms gently wrapped around the little boy perched on his lap. The child, his wide eyes sparkling with joy, looked up at his father, his small hands clapping in rhythm with the ovation around them. His grin was so wide it seemed to echo the celebration in the air. On stage, Samantha stood at the center of the dazzling lights, her eyes shimmering with a mixture of joy and deep emotion. The deep sapphire gown she wore sparkled under the spotlight, framing her as if she were a star shining against the vast night sky. Her face glowed with radiance, yet a quiet serenity lingered in her expression. She had found herself again after the stormy chapters of her life. James couldn't take his eyes off her. He felt his heart pounding, not from nervousness, but from an overwhelming pride that filled his chest. Samantha wasn't just a brilliant artist, she was the strongest woman he had ever known. She had taken her pain and transformed it into power, using music to tell her story and inspire everyone lucky enough to hear it. James leaning down, whispering to the boy,
"See that, son? Your mom is incredible, isn't she?"
The boy turned to him, his bright eyes twinkling like tiny stars. Boy grinning.
"Mom's the best in the whole world. Dad, don't you think she looks like a queen up there?"
James chuckled softly, his hand gently brushing through the boy's soft hair. James tenderly,
"She is a queen, son, but not just because she's shining on that stage tonight. She's a queen because she fought, she overcame, and she never gave up. That's what makes her truly special."
The boy tilted his head, pondering his father's words for a moment, then broke into a wide smile. Boy quietly,
"I want to be like Mom too. I want to be strong."
James leaned closer, his gaze filled with love as he looked deeply into his son's eyes. James in a low voice,
"And you will, because you're part of her. I know you'll do great things, son."
On stage, the applause began to fade, and the bright lights dimmed slowly, surrendering to a gentle darkness. Samantha gave one final bow, her serene smile never leaving her lips. She stepped back, retreating from the stage, leaving behind an audience brimming with admiration and raw emotion. James watched her until she disappeared behind the crimson velvet curtain, his arms tightening slightly around his son, as if to impart an added measure of warmth and security. James whispering, his voice heavy with emotion,
"Your mom is the strongest person I've ever known, and I hope that one day you'll be just as strong as she is."
The boy leaned his head against his father's chest, his eyes still alight with joy, though his smile softened into something quieter, as if cherishing the precious moment. Boy softly,
"I will, Dad, because I have you and Mom."
James smiled, his own eyes glistening, catching the faint remnants of the stage lights. He leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to the boy's soft hair, his heart swelling with a happiness so profound it nearly brought him to tears, a happiness born not of grandeur, but of simplicity, a happiness he hadn't known in years. For the first time, he felt he had rediscovered life's true meaning. As the lights in the auditorium faded to darkness, a fire burned brightly within James, a fire of love, hope, and a resolute promise to build a future richer in meaning than he had ever imagined. Life is not a flawless journey, and human beings are not immune to mistakes. But mistakes do not define us. It is how we confront and strive to mend them that reveals who we truly are. James had learned that redemption is not a brief apology or a single act of penance. It is a long and arduous path, one where he had to face his pain, his failures, and the darkest corners of his soul. It was a journey of courage, perseverance, and most importantly, love, the love he held for Samantha, for his child, and for the man he aspired to become. The message of this story is simple yet profound. Only when we find the courage to acknowledge our mistakes can we rediscover the things that truly matter: family, forgiveness, and the belief that it is never too late to begin anew, and to do so with greater grace and purpose. The truth is out, but does James Carter have the courage to continue on his path of redemption? Don't forget to check out the next videos to uncover what lies ahead for him, Samantha, and their special child.